When the ESS Resolute Margin eased out of jump and into the crowded traffic lanes around Periapsis Spire, the Kheltar Dominion still believed it owned the future. The station hung over its gas giant like a silvered bramble, ringed by shipyards and freight hubs. Countless freighters pulsed in and out of docking pedals, each one tagged and taxed. Every corridor, every compartment, every cubic meter could be assigned a budget line. Every budget line translated into obedience. This was how an old empire held its borders without firing weapons, with invoices, interest rates, and accounts that never quite balanced in anyone else's favor. The Dominion believed it understood all of that. It believed it understood accounting. It did not, yet, understand humans. Inside the Resolute Margin's briefing room, Arun Belay braced his hands on the edge of the central table, while the ship shuddered through docking sequences. He was tall for a human, lean, and dressed in a Terran Ledger Corps formal jacket that still carried faint creases from long-ago field audits on dusty worlds. The screen in front of him showed the latest briefing, a simplified map of the Dominion's known ledgers, and beneath it the wording of the contract. Scope of work, Arun read, as much to himself as to the others. Stabilize investor confidence, ensure ongoing liquidity, and make recommendations to optimize fiscal efficiency. Full access to relevant records, subject to security classification. Arbitration under the Interstellar Trade Codex. Rado Kovac sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, dark eyes hooded. Rado carried command like an old coat, comfortably, with no illusions. He had pushed for this mission, lobbied for it on Earth, and in the councils of new interstellar law. Full access, Rado said softly. There it is. Arun looked up, knowing exactly what the older man meant. Full access had a precise meaning in trade law. It could cut through entire forests of red tape if someone was stubborn enough. Subject to security classification, Mayzuberry reminded them. She sat with a tablet on her knees, fingers flicking through scrolls of preliminary data. They can bury critical things under that. Not forever, Lila Haddad said. She lounged in her seat, boots hooked around the legs of the chair, in a posture that would have earned her lectures in more ceremonial cultures. Audit is like gravity. If there's mass out there, we'll see its pull in the numbers. Iker Ureta, all quiet watchfulness and soldier's posture, leaned against the bulkhead. On the opposite side of the room, Juno Baral tried and failed to look as if she rode ships like this every week. Her hand oscillated between a stylus and the nervous urge to twirl a lock of hair. The deck light shifted from amber to green, docking complete. Rado rose. The Kheltari think we're here to rubber stamp their greatness, he said. We are not. We are here to tell the truth about their books. That's all. No more, no less. He looked directly at Arun. You lead the core audit, Arun. You see something wrong, you push. Whatever the pressure. Arun met his gaze and felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. He had never commanded fleets, never negotiated ceasefires. His wars were fought in rows and columns, but they were wars nonetheless. Understood, he said. Outside, Periapsis Spire waited, its corridors humming with the unseen flow of credits. The Kheltari reception hall where they first met Auditor General Vesshik was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings, metallic glyphs inlaid with precious metals, a view through armored glass of the station's rim where cargo barges flickered in the haze. A line of Kheltari bureaucrats in ceremonial sashes stood like an honor guard. Kheltari physiology tended toward tall and willowy, with cartilage crests sweeping back from narrow skulls and eyes like polished obsidian. Their skin shimmered in shades, from dusk blue to rust red, patterned in faint bands that shifted with mood. The bands around Vesshik's throat and temples were a measured, composed green when the humans entered. He stepped forward, hands folded, in what passed for a neutral greeting. Director Rado Kovac, Vesshik said, his translators, rendering the consonant-rich language into rolling Terran vowels. And valued staff of the Terran Ledger Corps. Welcome to Periapsis Spire, and to the trust of the Kheltar Dominion. Rado inclined his head, careful to match neither obsequiousness nor arrogance. We appreciate the opportunity, he said. This is our first major engagement in your space. We intend to make it exemplary. Vesshik's bands brightened a fraction. Amusement, perhaps, or skepticism. "We have allotted you workspace adjacent to the regional clearinghouse," the Auditor General said. "You will find that our ledgers are already the envy of the sector. Your role is to assure our partners of what we already know." It was spoken without malice, as if explaining a simple fact. The stars shine, gravity binds, and the Kheltar Dominion's books are sound. Arun, standing slightly behind Rado, watched Vesshik's eyes with the practiced focus of a man who had spent his life watching body language across a dozen species. "Our role is to bless, not to question," he translated silently. He smiled anyway, the friendly, open expression that had disarmed more than one belligerent auditor in his time. "We look forward to learning from your systems," Arun said. "And if there are any efficiencies to be found, we will highlight them." "Efficiencies," Vesshik repeated. "Of course." As they followed their Kheltari escort out of the hall, Iker fell in beside Arun. "They posted more security than needed for an audit reception," Iker murmured, keeping his gaze straight ahead. "Armed units at the side doors, and half the staff up there were watching Juno's hands instead of Rado's face. New species, new worries," Arun said. "They don't know yet that all we carry are calculators," Iker snorted softly. "Calculators and stubbornness," he said. The human workspace on Periapsis Spire was a repurposed cargo bay with thin walls and thinner patience from the surrounding administration. The air smelled faintly of lubricant and disinfectant. Someone had done a rush job to make it presentable. Modular desks, consoles tied into the station's financial network, a transparent section of wall overlooking a maze of freighter berths. By 2 p.m. station time on their first day, Arun had his team logged into the Dominion's main audit interface. It was a thing of beauty on the surface. Streamlined dashboards showed tax intakes, expenditure trees, cross-sector subsidies. Color-coded flows illustrated the empire's wealth pouring from frontier mining colonies to core industrial nodes and back out in the form of infrastructure and defense. Juno sat with her mouth slightly open. "It's like getting front-row seats to a giant's heartbeat," she whispered. May was less sentimental. She watched the streams, eyes flicking. "Look at that smoothing algorithm," she said. "Quarterly variances rounded off like someone ironed the graph. No healthy system is that flat for this long." "You're already criticizing their heartbeat," Arun said. "Fast work." "It's not criticism," May replied. "It's observation. Real life is messy." Lila cracked her knuckles and dove into a deeper menu. Her fingers danced across the keys. "Firewalls strict, but not paranoid," she said. "We can see only what they think we need. The rest is sealed in higher classifications. I'll map the walls while you saints look at the stained glass." Arun started with something simple, a supply chain audit for a mid-tier fleet maintenance program. Cross-referencing purchase orders against delivery receipts, maintenance logs, and budget approvals was tedious to some of his colleagues, almost meditative for him. The first anomaly surfaced before 4 p.m. A line item: replacement coils for destroyer-class engines. Authorized, paid, and logged as delivered. Except the receiving station reported a different shipment number. The coils themselves existed, somewhere, but the trail between the treasury and the ship had a jump. He put a marker on it and kept going. At 6 p.m. he found another in an unrelated program, and another at 9 p.m. By 1 a.m., he had a small constellation of them, pulsing like red stars in his staging area. They were small discrepancies, individually, the kind anyone could explain with sloppy data entry or minor corruption. But they were the same pattern, the same kind of jump in the trail. The same invisible hand, moving funds and inventory between shells. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, and let his mind drift for a moment over the wider shape. "Where do you go, little leaks?" At another station, May ran anomaly detection models against the overview data they had been given. Her algorithms were not complex by cutting-edge standards, but they were persistent and tuned by hard experience across wildly different economies. The Dominion's graphs came back too smooth, too stable, too consistent over decades. "There's variance missing," she said aloud. Juno, half dozing over a training module, blinked awake. "What?" "Variance," May repeated. "Economic noise. Recessions, booms, crises. I'm sure the Dominion had them, but the graphs have been flattened. Maybe they really are that stable, Juno said. They're old, big. Maybe this is what a perfectly managed economy looks like. May glanced at her, not unkindly. Perfect stability over centuries doesn't exist, she said. Not in weather, not in populations, not in anything alive, unless someone is smoothing the record or moving the noise somewhere else. Juno chewed on that, frowning. Nearby, Lila cursed softly at her console. They've put an interesting blind spot in our interface, she said. See these codes? She highlighted a range that ran along the edge of their access rights. Any query that would pull data tagged between these values dies before it returns results. No error message. The software just pretends that range doesn't exist. Glitch? Arun asked. Glitches are random, Lila said. This is surgical and old. You can see the scar tissue in the code. Later that week, Auditor General Vesshik made his first unannounced visit. He arrived at 8 a.m. station time with a pair of assistants and an expression carved into neutral courtesy. His throat bands glowed a calm green. How progresses our mutual endeavor? He asked, standing beside Arun's station. Arun gestured to the overview. We're still acquainting ourselves with your structure, he said. The systems are impressive, but there are a few anomalies we'd like to understand better. Vesshik's gaze flicked to the screen. Arun knew that the Kheltari's retinal membranes could filter and focus at higher resolution than humans. The Auditor General saw every color, every marker. You have been granted an appropriate window, Vesshik said. Beyond that, matters are sensitive. We did not invite your species to pore over our secrets, only to reassure our partners that we obey our own laws. We cannot reassure them if we don't understand the whole picture, Arun replied. Vesshik's bands darkened a fraction. Be wise in how you define whole, Terran, he said quietly. The Dominion's stability is not a puzzle for new eyes to solve overnight. Your contract is to stabilize, not destabilize. He left without waiting for a response. When the door hissed shut behind him, Juno exhaled. He knows, she said. He knows we saw something. Of course he knows, Lila said. Audit generals always know. The question is whether he wants to fix it or keep it hidden. Arun watched the closed door. He wants the empire to keep moving, he said. If the wheels grind a few people under, that's a cost he's already priced in. Rado came in a few minutes later, having had his own brush with station politics. He listened as the team reported Vesshik's warning. You keep going, Rado said when they were done. We knew they would try to keep us near the surface. That's why I pushed for that contract language. If we don't push against the edge of access, we're not doing our job. Arun nodded. He had expected no less. If they terminate the contract? May asked. Rado's smile was a brief, cold tilt of his lips. Then they explained to half the galaxy why they fired their accountants mid-audit, he said, and why insurance underwriters should continue trusting their bonds. They can shout, stall, and threaten, but they can't afford to look as if they're hiding rot. That's our leverage. It was not weapons and warships. It was something older, more fundamental. Trust in the numbers that underpinned every contract, every shipment, every fleet. Around 10 p.m. that same day, Juno made her famous mistake. She had been playing with a training module that simulated invoice flows, designed to teach new auditors how to trace funds through deeply nested budgets. The module had its own little sandbox ledger, harmless and self-contained. Or so she thought. Bored and a little reckless, she decided to see how the Dominion's interface handled a test invoice. She crafted a small, nonsensical entry, a routine compliance adjustment for a maintenance facility that did not exist, for an amount so trivial that even a mid-ranking officer could sign off on it without blinking. She submitted it, expecting an error. The system accepted it. Not only that, it processed and paid it almost instantly. Juno stared at the confirmation icon. She said. Lila? Arun? There's something weird. Lila slid her chair over. Did you just bill an alien empire? She asked. I just put in a test, Juno said. It was supposed to bounce. Lila examined the trace. The field tags? She murmured. See that? Anything labeled routine compliance adjustment bypasses several verification checks. She ran a deeper trace on the origin of the funds. The trail started in a general reserve account, as expected, then branched into a thicket of sub-accounts, and then stopped. Not because the path truly ended, but because their access hit one of those surgical blind spots. Lila sat back, eating the data with her eyes. They built their own trapdoor, she said. Programmed this class of invoice to pull from a pool we're not supposed to know about. But they still have to reconcile the outflow. So somewhere, there's an internal record with a corresponding entry. They're hiding it from us, not from themselves. Arun hovered behind her, heart speeding. If we can push enough harmless transactions of this type, he said slowly, and map which visible accounts adjust in response, we can infer the shape of whatever sits behind that wall. Indirect reconstruction, May said. She was already sketching symbols on a tablet. We don't see the hidden accounts, but we watch how their gravity tugs on the ones we can see. Juno's cheeks flushed with mingled shame and excitement. I didn't mean to. You gave us a key, Arun said. Just don't wave it around where Vesshik can see. That night, while most of the station slept, the human team ran simulations, tiny test invoices, always low value, never for anything explosive. Each one tugged on the hidden reservoir of funds, shifting balances in peripheral accounts by fractions that May's models could detect. Slowly, a ghost outline emerged. A reservoir of off-the-books capital, phasing in and out of the visible structure, old and sprawling. The shadow ledger. Arun considered the name when he first spoke it aloud. It fit. This was not a single account. It was an entire parallel structure, interwoven with the official ledgers but missing from the public record. The humans were not the first to suspect its existence. Vesshik had known something lay behind the blind spots. No one with his position could be ignorant. But suspicion and proof were different things. By the time they had sketched the first rough map of the shadow ledger's edges, more than one Kheltari eye had turned toward them. Commander Yorlan of the Dominion's Military Liaison Office watched their access logs with a soldier's instinct for threat. He saw their frequent queries near classification boundaries, the strange pattern of tiny compliance adjustments, the increasingly tangled network of cross-checks. He had no patience for numbers. To him, accounting was a tool to ensure fleets were supplied and weapons fueled. If the tool misbehaved, you fixed it or replaced it. You did not let it question the orders flowing from above. This Terran audit is overreaching, he told Vesshik in a private chamber that overlooked Periapsis Spire's docking pedals. Their mappings go well beyond reassurance. They are testing our security, our sovereignty. Veshik's throat bands pulsed in an agitated violet. I am aware of their methods, he said, and of the pressure our partners have put upon us. The Dominion's credit rating has faltered in recent cycles, Commander. Abruptly dismissing the humans would worsen that. They were hired to soothe jittery bankers, not to tear open our history, Yorlan said. The two may no longer be separable, Vesshik murmured. He thought of the lines he had seen on Arun's screens. The patterns repeated across time, the missing variants, the hints of a second structure humming beneath their own proud edifices. He had devoted his life to the purity of the ledger. The revelation that parts of it were deliberately obscured, even from his station, gnawed at him. We will watch them, he decided, and we will nudge where necessary. If they approach something that cannot be exposed without bringing down the sky, we shall divert them. Gently? Yorlan asked. If possible, Vesshik said. Blunt measures attract scrutiny we can ill afford. The Dominion's enemies are not only beyond our borders. Enemies like the Orshun Syndicate, out on the darker routes beyond Periapsis Spire, Orshuni freighters carried more than ordinary cargo between worlds. Their crews moved unsanctioned weapons, disputed valuables, fugitives, and, more importantly, streams of credits, whose origins none of the Dominion's official inspectors ever quite managed to trace. The Syndicate had made itself indispensable to the Empire's less presentable needs. Certain debts had to be hidden, certain bribes laundered, certain punitive measures applied at deniable arm's length. The shadow ledger ran through Orshuni nodes like blood through capillaries. When the first whispers reached an Orshun broker that humans on Periapsis Spire were asking the wrong questions, he dismissed them. Humans were new to interstellar finance, ambitious but naive. When a courier brought him a fragment of a reconstruction model stolen from May's work area, grainy and incomplete, but unmistakably a map of hidden flows, he lost his appetite. Within a day, the syndicate's regional council had ordered that the human auditor's activities be curtailed. Softly, if possible, the message from an upper echelon read, "We cannot have them pull threads that bind our own contracts together, but we also cannot be seen as the hand behind any misfortune." Unfortunately for them, subtlety is difficult when events begin to accumulate their own momentum. The first serious incident came during what should have been a routine systems maintenance window. It was 3 a.m. station time. Most of Periapsis Spire's offices had dimmed their lights. In the Terran workspace, Leela and May were the only ones still awake, faces lit by their screens. Arun had forced himself to sleep 3 hours earlier, a concession to biology. An automated notice flashed across their consoles. Scheduled atmosphere recycling override. Minor depressurization in outer corridor section. No action required. Lila's instincts, honed in less civilized postings than this, prickled. "May," she said, "check the maintenance schedule. Was this override planned?" May, who had spent enough time around security to respect paranoia, pulled up station infrastructure logs. "No," she said after a moment. "There's a maintenance task listed for next week in that sector, not tonight. And the work description doesn't match this override." An icon on the schematic winked angrily. The outer hallway that wrapped around their bay was venting atmosphere. "Seal," Lila snapped. She slapped the emergency interlock on their own bulkhead. The door closed with a heavy thump as alarm lights flared. A moment later, something on the far side of the wall slammed into it. The vibration shuddered through the deck. Someone had been outside, in that corridor, at 3 a.m. Within minutes, Iker came pounding in from an interior access route, weapon still holstered, but his posture wired. "What happened?" he demanded. "Unauthorized depressurization just outside our door," Lila said. "Someone scheduled a fake maintenance override." Iker checked his wrist unit, accessing security feeds. The hallway cameras near their bay had coincidentally failed 30 seconds before the override and returned 30 seconds after. "For coincidence, you need randomness," Lila said when he reported this. "This is orchestration." Arun, roused from sleep, arrived in time to catch the tail end. "This is about the audit," he said. "Not proven," Iker replied. His mind, however, was already moving ahead. If someone wanted them dead but subtlety was required, there would be more attempts. Different shapes, same goal. In the days that followed, glitches multiplied. A cargo drone nearly crushed Juno in a storage bay when its route was inexplicably altered. A batch of data destined for Earth vanished mid-transmission, replaced with a soothing system message about network congestion that, on closer examination, did not match any known error code. Each time, the official investigation found no link, no pattern. Each time, Iker's inner ledger of attempted harms grew. Their work, meanwhile, pressed deeper. When the Terran team demanded on-site inspection rights at the array of Thasun, citing obscure sections of the Interstellar Trade Codex, many in the Dominion's bureaucracy were appalled. The array was more than a data vault. It was a relic from before the Kheltar Dominion, a colossal structure orbiting a dim star, built by a species long vanished. Its honeycombed interior housed records reaching back farther than most cultures' written histories. Over generations, the Dominion had turned the array into the final resting place for its most sensitive accounts. Even Vesshik had never walked its central core. The letter of the contract, however, supported the humans' argument. Any repository that held financial records pertinent to the audit could be inspected. Reluctantly, and under pressure from foreign investors who were beginning to murmur about transparency, Chancellor Drexxa allowed a limited visit. As the shuttle bearing Arun, Lila, May, and Juno descended into one of the array's docking slots, Arun felt the way the structure's presence pressed on his senses. It was not gravity. It was the collective weight of decisions recorded here, of debts and payments and quiet compromises carved into the bedrock of communal memory. For the Kheltari, it was a shrine. For the humans, It was a cathedral of numbers. They were greeted by a small group of array stewards, robed in quiet colors, skin patterns muted. They moved with the solemnity of people for whom error was blasphemy. "Your access will be guided," the senior steward said. "Certain cores are sealed by ancient compact. We will provide the requested samples. We also need to test compatibility with our own tools," May said. "Our reconciliation engine requires live data streams to verify integrity." The steward hesitated. "This has been authorized by Auditor General Vesshik and Chancellor Drexxa," Arun said gently. "We will not alter your records. We only wish to understand them." Within the inner data amphitheater, Lila and May deployed the quantum reconciliation engine. To an untrained eye, it looked like a cluster of portable consoles and storage units. In truth, its heart lay in the algorithms, cradled in its cores. Routines that could cross-compare massive ledgers, detect inconsistencies, and, more importantly, flag gaps where records should exist but did not. Lila presented it as a simple compatibility tool. "We're going to run dual-read tests," she told the stewards. "We'll feed in samples of your records alongside ours, making sure formats align. You'll see the outputs. No changes, just analysis." The stewards, reassured by the transparency, granted limited access. May configured the engine to request a wide spread of transaction histories, including high-level accounts the Dominion had already agreed were in scope. "Now," she murmured to Lila, "watch for the echoes." As the engine digested the feed, it generated its own internal reconciliations. For every transaction, it sought the matching entry on the other side. Debit to credit, obligation to fulfillment. Where both sides existed openly, the process was seamless. Where only one side appeared in the visible ledger, the engine flagged an inconsistency. And where the array itself knew there was a hidden counterpart, a record in a sealed partition but could not provide it because access was denied, it generated internal log entries noting the absence. Those logs, by the terms of the audit, could be exported. Lila and May had crafted the test parameters precisely to maximize this effect. They did not need to break into the sealed cores. They simply coaxed the system into telling them where and how often those cores had to be accessed to reconcile everyday business. By the time the test concluded, the quantum reconciliation engine's storage banks held what amounted to a skeleton key, a list of every instance where a public transaction depended on a hidden one, tagged by time and rough category. Later, back on Periapsis' spire, May and Nikhil Duarte pored over the extracted data. Nikhil appeared on a wall screen, transmitting from a Terran analysis center light years away. His hair was perpetually unkempt, his expression bright and weary all at once. "You're telling me you got the array itself to tattle," he said, impressed. "That's elegant." May nodded. "The patterns line up with what we're seeing in the regular ledgers," she said. For centuries, a significant fraction of the Dominion's transactions have relied on off-book guarantees handled through this hidden structure. Nikhil sketched circles in the air with a stylus. "Once upon a time," he said, "empires used tribute and empire coinage. Then debts became more complex. They started to run parallel books, one for public consumption, one for reality. At some point, reality dragged both down. You're seeing the same script scaled up across stars." Arun listened, arms folded. "Can they sustain it?" he asked. "Not indefinitely," Nikhil said. "Your data suggests they've been rolling over obligations for a long time, layering new promises on old. Gods, Arun, their equivalent of welfare, military pay, colonial subsidies, so much of it depends on future growth that their own models admit will slow." May tapped a graph. "Look at this," she said. "If one major client species defaults, if they just stop making the mandatory payments into this system, the shortfall ripples out. Within 2 fiscal cycles, the Dominion's core reserve ratios fall below treaty thresholds. Insurance triggers, interest skyrockets, and half their programs become unfundable." "Could they compensate through inflation?" Arun asked. "To a point," Nikhil said. "But even inflation has to be managed. And your own reports indicate their currency is already under pressure." Silence settled over the room. as the implications crystallized. The Kheltar Dominion was not simply corrupt, not merely ruthless. It was precarious. It had built its power on a web of debts and subsidies designed to keep subject worlds compliant, but that same web left it exposed to systemic failure. Arun thought of Vesshik, so certain of the Dominion's solidity, of Drexxa, who had signed the authorization for this audit, expecting flattery, not dissection. "We can show them how deep this goes," he said. "If we do it carefully, if they accept it, they might start unwinding the coils before they snap." "And if they don't?" May asked. Arun looked at the shadow ledger model, its tangled lines crossing species, sectors, centuries. "Then we owe the rest of the galaxy the truth," he said. Rado agreed, but with caveats. "We're auditors, not revolutionaries," he said later in a closed meeting with Arun and Lila. "We can't dictate political outcomes. We can only reveal the facts and perhaps offer frameworks. We can choose the order in which we reveal those facts," Lila said. "That's already a political act." "True," Rado said, "which means we must choose with care." Their calculations did not stay secret. Within the Kheltar High Council chamber on Vorakesh Prime, a world of glittering spires and old scars covered by new gloss, Chancellor Drexxa received a report from Vesshik that made her throat bands flare white. "They claim our structure is unstable?" she demanded. Vesshik stood with his hands clasped, as rigid as she had ever seen him. "They have data from the array of Thasun," he said. "From Periapsis Spire. From half our provincial nodes. Their models can be replicated with our own tools. I have done so, in part. The conclusions are difficult." Drexxa turned away to gaze out at the city. Airliners traced glowing threads between towers. Industrial barges crawled across the upper atmosphere with the slow dignity of whales. "You recommended we hire these humans," she said. "I recommended we reassure our partners," Vesshik said. "At the time, I believed our house was in better order than it is. That misjudgment is mine." "Can we ignore them?" Drexxa asked, not because she did not know the answer, but because she needed to hear it aloud. "If we suppress their findings and leak so much as brushes the outer markets, our credit will plummet," Vesshik said. "If we discredit them, they will defend their reputation with the data. If we detain them, we violate the trade codex, and our enemies will paint us as lawless." Drexxa's hands curled. "What do they propose?" she asked. "Nothing official yet," Vesshik said. "But I have observed their pattern. They are exploring controlled disclosure. Partial truths released to key partners. Gradual pressure to reform without collapse. What they call reform is our humiliation," Drexxa said. "Our rivals would pounce." She thought of the Volari Concord, always cautious and unnervingly patient, of internal factions that had chafed under the fiscal pacification protocols, resenting the way entire worlds were managed through perpetual debt. "There is another option," she said slowly. "A demonstration. Something that proves to our markets that the Dominion is bold, dynamic, capable of opening new frontiers. We achieve triumph, and their talk of collapse fades into irrelevance." Vesshik's bands dimmed. "You speak of the torsion gate," he said. Drexxa's gaze lifted to a point in the air only she could see. "If we can complete it soon, and successfully," she said, "we gain access to underexploited resource regions, enough additional flow to shore up our reserves and restructure obligations on our terms. The old debts become manageable." "And if the project fails?" Vesshik asked. "It will not fail," Drexxa said. She knew, though, even as she spoke, of the budget cuts that had hollowed safety margins, the corners that had been shaved to keep other programs afloat. She knew because she herself had approved those reassignments. To keep the Empire stable, one took risks. She turned back to Vesshik. "I want these humans managed," she said. "Give them something to gnaw on that does not threaten the central supports, and prepare a case to challenge their findings if needed." Vesshik bowed, but inside, his commitment to the numbers, to the pure lines of debit and credit, twisted like a man in a narrowing tunnel. On Periapsis Spire, pressure increased. Commander Yorlan's security presence became more visible. Where once there had been a token honor guard near the Terran Workspace, now there were fully armored Kheltari troopers rotating through the corridor. "Protection," Yorlan said when Rado raised an eyebrow. You have attracted attention from unsavory elements. The Orshwun Syndicate is not pleased by your inquiries. They have long arms. Have they reached you? Rado asked softly. Yorlan's crest stiffened. I serve the Dominion, he said. Not smugglers. It was true. And yet, the Dominion and the Syndicate had brushed shoulders so often in the dark that their feathers sometimes interlaced. Behind the scenes, the Syndicate escalated its attempts. A corrupted update nearly bricked the quantum reconciliation engine's core during a late-night maintenance window. Lila caught it at the last moment, teeth gritted as she rerouted around the poisoned code. They're learning, she said. Next time, they'll try a different angle. Iker and his small human security contingent worked with station security to trace the source of the update. The trail led through 3 shell companies, 1 obsolete account, and finally, predictably, nowhere. Orshuwuni fingers had learned from the best. Unseen, deniable, always 1 layer removed. Human persistence, however, had its own form of ruthlessness. It doesn't matter if we can't prove who, Iker told Arun. What matters is we treat every anomaly, every misfire, as opposition. We don't wait for permission to protect ourselves. He reshuffled guard rotations, rewired who had physical access to the Terran hardware, and quietly recruited sympathetic station staff who had family ties to colonies that had long suffered under invisible debts. Word of the human audit began to leak in ways no one could fully control. First came the rumors that the humans had found secret reserves, that they held the keys to new wealth, that they planned to sell this knowledge to the highest bidder. Then came quieter whispers through diplomatic channels that the Kheltar Dominion's balance sheets might not be as unassailable as claimed. Representatives from the Valari Concord requested a private briefing. Rado, after consulting with Arun, agreed to a limited disclosure. We can show them enough to prove there is a structural problem, Arun said. Not so much that markets panic overnight. In a secure conference room, with Commander Yorlan glowering outside, Arun and May presented a carefully curated set of graphs to the Valari delegation. They showed the overbilling patterns, the dependency of Valari trade terms on hidden subsidies that could be revoked, the way certain interest rates had been quietly raised after political disagreements, veiled as market adjustments. One Valari diplomat, feathers pale with consternation, murmured, "We trusted them." "You trusted the numbers," Arun said softly. "You still can. Just ensure they're the right ones." The Valari left without making any overt commitments. Within a week, however, they began to slow certain scheduled payments to Dominion accounts. It was done gently, with plausible excuses, but insurance underwriters noticed. Economic models, like physical ones, respond to small nudges when the system is already at the tipping point. Vesshik noticed, too. He walked into the Terran Workspace one afternoon, exhausted from meetings. "You are shaking foundations you do not fully comprehend," he told Arun. "Do you know how many worlds depend on the subsidies you are dissecting? How many civil services? How many feeding programs? How many fleets that keep pirates at bay?" Arun met his gaze. "We have mapped those dependencies," he said. "We know who gets what, and how their debts have been used to keep them compliant. Your fiscal pacification protocols are not charity. They are leashes." Veshik's bands flared. "Leashes can restrain violence," he said. "Without them, we might have had open war. And with them, you have slow suffocation." Arun replied. "We're offering a chance to restructure before both leash and neck break." "In your human image," Vesshik said. "In a transparent image," Arun said, "where no one can hide the knots by shuffling accounts between shadows." It was in this simmering context that the Orshuan Syndicate decided to abandon subtlety. The array of Thasuun, they judged, was the source of too much danger. If its data could not be fully controlled, then it might have to be removed. Their plan was audacious and simple. Under cover of a scheduled transfer of obsolete physical records, they smuggled demolition devices into secondary access shafts. Timers would detonate charges designed not to destroy the array outright, too large a task, but to cripple its core data channels, wiping out decades of sensitive records and, with them, the human's trail. They miscalculated 2 things. First, They underestimated the conservatism of the array's stewards, who checked every crate like priests handling relics. A suspicious weight discrepancy in a container of archival plates triggered scrutiny. An alarm silently pinged various authorized parties, including the Terran audit team. Second, they underestimated human impatience. When the alarm reached Periapsis' spire, Iker did not wait for a full chain of command response. "The array is our anchor," he told Rado. "If it goes, we lose half our proof. I'm taking a team." Rado did not waste time arguing. "You have go-ahead," he said. "Liaise with Yorlan's people. Try not to start an interspecies shooting war in a data vault." Within hours, a joint security detachment human and Kheltari reached the array. Iker, helmet tucked under his arm, met Yorlan on the docking ramp. "Your adversaries, not mine," Yorlan said, looking askance at the Terrans. "Our adversaries now," Iker replied, "unless you'd rather keep letting them push you around your own empire." In the maze of the array's interior, the stewards guided them through hushed corridors toward the flagged shafts. By the time they reached the first device, its timer had counted down into tense minutes. Kheltari bomb disposal technicians swarmed it. Iker and his human counterparts fanned out, sealing off cross corridors. In the muffled moments before the device was neutralized, Iker thought not of glory, but of spreadsheets, of the lives encoded in them, salaries, pensions, land deeds, education grants, every record that gave ordinary beings a sense of continuity. If that went up in a bright white flare, so would any hope of persuading the galaxy with numbers instead of weapons. They succeeded. Barely. The charges were disarmed instead of detonated. The Orshuan operatives behind the infiltration were not caught. They had already slipped away on a freighter that left as a legitimate courier. But their intent had been revealed. When the news reached Chancellor Drexxa, she slammed her fist on the council table hard enough to make the lights tremble. "This is what indulgence of criminals gets us," she snarled. "We built a cage of favors and fear, and now the beasts think they own the keys." Her political instincts, cornered, drove her toward the bold gamble she had already considered. "Advance the torsion gate timetable," she ordered. "We will demonstrate our strength and silence these whispers." Vesshik, sitting at the far end of the table, felt something inside him sag. "The safety margins are already thin," he said. "Rushing." "We cannot afford timidity," Drexxa cut in. "The market must see decisive action." Out among the installation arrays, where the torsion gate's shimmering skeletal ring hung incomplete over a barren moon, engineers received the new orders with a mixture of elation and dread. Back on Periapsis' spire, the human team received a formal summons. The message was terse. "You will appear before the Grand Council on Vorakesh Prime to present your findings and justify your actions, which are causing serious destabilization." Rado read it twice, then looked up at his staff. "This is it," he said. "They'll try to crush us in public or absorb us. Either way, we don't leave that room without changing something. Or we don't leave at all," Lila said dryly. Rado's lips thinned. "They still need us alive, long enough to refute us, if they can," he said. "Dead auditors who claim the Empire was unsound are not as reassuring as live ones they can parade as having exaggerated. That's our breathing space. We use it." Before they left, Lila loaded a contingency into the quantum reconciliation engine. "If we're silenced," she told May and Arun, "it triggers an automatic release. Data packets go to major trade houses, legal nodes, the Valari Concord, and anyone else we flagged as needing to know. Once it's out, we can't control how fast the collapse goes," May warned. "That's the cost of gagging the messenger," Lila said. The council chamber on Vorakesh Prime was a cathedral of authority, tiered seating rising in hushed arcs, banners marking factions, a central floor where supplicants stood exposed to every gaze. Arun felt those gazes, like points of heat on his skin, as he walked to the center alongside Rado. Behind them, on slightly raised platforms, May, Lila, and Vesshik stood by a shared console. Chancellor Drexxa addressed them from the highest seat, crest haloed by light. "Director Rado Kovac of the Terran Ledger Corps," she began, voice amplified without need of devices. "You were invited here to stabilize faith in the Dominion's economy. Instead, your actions have coincided with increased volatility, emboldened rivals, and open attacks on our infrastructure. Explain yourself. Rado stepped forward, hands open. We did what auditors do, Chancellor, he said. We followed the numbers. They led to places your own people tried to hide from us. A ripple ran through the chamber. You accuse our auditors of dishonesty? A counselor barked. We accuse your system of imbalance, Arun said, before Rado could respond. His voice was firm but not raised. The room quieted, curiosity wrestling with anger. Not in a moral sense, in a mathematical one. Show them, Rado said quietly. May and Vesshik, side by side, brought up the first display above the central floor. It was simple, a graph of revenues and expenditures over centuries, rendered in flowing lines. On one side, the official version, smooth curves, controlled deviations. On the other, the reconstructed reality, jagged peaks, deep troughs, patched over by hidden transfers. May spoke, her tone as neutral as she could make it. These are your own records, she said, cross-referenced through the array of Thasun. For long periods, your expenditures have exceeded sustainable levels. To bridge the gap, you engaged in what we call structural borrowing, commitments to future flows that assume continued growth. That is ordinary practice, a counselor protested. We invest, we grow, we borrow against that growth. It becomes ordinary until the growth slows, Nikhil's recorded voice said, piped in as part of a prearranged segment. He had refused to travel in person, preferring his numbers to speak. Then the structure begins to resemble a tower built on increasingly narrow stilts. Next came diagrams of the shadow ledger, not as secret account numbers, but as patterns of dependence. Arun pointed to nodes glowing brighter than others. These represent client species and regions whose economies are tightly bound by your fiscal pacification protocols, he said. They receive subsidies in exchange for concessions. They take on debts whose terms can be altered in response to political behavior. This gives you leverage. It also ties your fate to theirs more tightly than you admit in your public accounts. A holomap flared, showing a web of worlds. Strings of color indicated flows, credits, resources, influence. At its center, the Kheltar core blazed bright. And here, May said, highlighting a fragile-looking node, we model what happens if even one major participant defaults. Due to famine, rebellion, resource exhaustion, or simple refusal, she flicked a control. The simulation ran. The initial default rippled through guarantor accounts, forced revaluations, triggered clauses in investor agreements. Within moments, half the web had shifted color, flagged as unstable. Reserve ratios dipped below treaty limits. Insurance contracts auto-terminated, borrowing costs spiked. The Kheltar core's glow flickered erratically. This is what we mean when we say the system is precarious, Arun said. This is not about morality. It's about balance. A low susurrus filled the chamber, counselors conferring, hissing, some scoffing, others already thinking of their own district's exposure. Drexxa waited, then raised a hand for silence. You paint our structure as fragile, she said. Yet it has stood for centuries. Many bridges stand until the moment they fall, Arun said. The cracks do not mean immediate collapse. They do mean collapse is certain unless repaired. Convenient for you to present yourselves as necessary engineers. Drexxa said, what do you propose? That we dismantle our own leverage? That we open every ledger to every rival? We propose transparency, Rado said. Shared oversight mechanisms. You retain power, but not the power to hide the costs from those who bear them. Others sign the same treaties, accept the same scrutiny. A common rulebook. Murmurs. Some outright laughter. And if we refuse? Drexxa asked. Rado glanced briefly at Lila, then back at Drexxa. Then, he said, the truth will still exist. It will only reach your partners without your ability to prepare them. That path is more chaotic. We wish to avoid it. Drexxa's gaze hardened. You would blackmail an empire, she said. We would fulfill our duty to accuracy, Arun said. Your contract with us did not include a clause allowing us to lie for your convenience. The Chancellor's throat bands flared crimson. Enough, she said sharply. I move that this council revoke the Terran Ledger Corps' mandate within Kheltar space and confiscate their tools pending further review. Before she could bring the matter to vote, a side door opened. A messenger hurried in, whispering into a functionary's ear. The functionary went pale and passed the whisper up the chain. Within moments, it reached Drexxa. Her crest stiffened. What? She demanded aloud. They did what? The chamber's central display flickered, supplanted by a live feed marked from the torsion gate installation. The vast, incomplete ring over the barren moon glowed a sickly, pulsing light. Energy flows arced unevenly along its spine. A panicked voice came through the audio. Stability control is outside safe range. We warned the schedule was too aggressive. The feed shook. Bright points along the gate's circumference flared into miniature suns as fail-safe structures strained. Drexxa's intent to stage a moment of triumph was unraveling in real time. Arun's stomach dropped. He had seen the gate's budget lines, the repeated cost cuts, the opaque side payments. He understood, even without being an engineer, what those meant for safety. If it collapses entirely, May said under her breath, the backwash into local space could tear apart the installation. Maybe more. Is Periapsis' spire in range? Juno, watching from a lower dais, whispered. Lila's mind was already moving ahead. The installation's autonomous systems will make trade-offs, she said quietly. Shed sections, reroute energy, sacrifice containment, if that's what its instructions tell it is. Last priority. Those priorities are written by budgets and project managers. We can influence those. How? Arun asked. We still have hooks into the Dominion's financial control software, Lila said. Her eyes met Vesshik's. You people wired your project management straight into treasury disbursements, right? Safety subsystems are funded as separate line items? Yes, Vesshik said, grasping her thought with auditor's intuition. Every automatic decision follows defined funding priorities. Then we hack the money, Lila said. We make the system think that every credit available must go to containment and shutdown, not completion. We bribe the gate to fail safely. It was absurd on the face of it. Solve a budding disaster by changing spreadsheets. But the Dominion had tied its machine's choices to fiscal cues. The humans would simply speak that language. Drexxa, still reeling from the unfolding mess, had little attention free to block them. Do it, Rado said. Vesshik hesitated for a fraction, then moved to the console beside Lila and May. I can authorize emergency reallocation, he said. Under ancient disaster statutes, no one can contest it in the moment. His hands moved, entering credentials that shook hidden locks free. Lila overlaid Kheltari interfaces with her own scripts. We're diverting funds from non-critical sub-projects, she said, flagging all completion tasks as unfunded, flagging all safety and containment tasks as priority 0, fully funded, and mandated. May watched the gate's telemetry. Energy rebalancing just got a different weighting, she said. Subsystems are downgrading warp field completion attempts and shunting capacity to structural bracing. It's working. A little. On the chamber's main display, the gate's light shifted. The wild flares along its ring began to subside as sections jettisoned in controlled bursts. Segments of the structure peeled away, venting energy into empty space instead of back into the core. One quadrant failed catastrophically, a miniature nova blossoming where metal once was. Shockwaves rippled across the barren moon's surface, lifting plumes of dust. But the rest of the ring held. A bright, central pulse, what would have been the gate's opening, flickered and died. In the council chamber, the silence was stunned. You forced our own systems to defy my directive, Drexxa said, staring at the humans, and at Vesshik, as if seeing strangers. We gave your systems the means to keep your people alive, Vesshik said, voice hoarse. Chancellor, your orders were driving them toward a catastrophic outcome because the budgets you signed told them that visible success mattered more than risk. We merely changed the ledger you had already taught them to obey. Around them, counselors whispered. Some stared in fury at Drexxa, others at the humans. Many looked shaken by how close they had come to disaster on live broadcast. Arun watched the lines of light from the gates slowly dim. "You can tell your people this was a deliberate abort," he said quietly. "A demonstration that you were willing to prioritize safety over prestige. Or you can blame us. Either way, the sky is still there." Drexxa's power was bleeding out into the room. She sensed it. She also sensed, perhaps more importantly, that the narrative was slipping from her control. "You have entangled yourselves in our sovereignty," she said. "You meddle in matters beyond your mandate. Your own laws gave us that mandate," Rado said. "So did your need for credibility." Counselor Pyomek, who had watched the humans work with growing, uneasy admiration, rose from his seat. "Chancellor," he said, voice carrying, "whatever their oversteps, the Terrans have just spared us a disaster of your making. We may resent their manner, but not their numbers." Others nodded, emboldened. "And those numbers," Pyomek continued, "show us that we cannot continue as we have. We have built a system that depends on debt as shackles. It is failing. We can respond by doubling down on secrecy and risk, or by opening the books and sharing control." Words like sharing and control had never mixed easily in this chamber, yet the spectacle of the torsion gate's near collapse, combined with the raw logic of the audit, had weakened old certainties. In another timeline, perhaps, Drexxa might have rallied the old guard into a crackdown. She might have had the humans arrested under pretext, tried to seize their tools, demanded loyalty tests of every wavering counselor. But the images of the flickering gate were already being replayed across the Dominion. Markets were reacting. Allies were watching. To choose naked suppression now would be to confirm every fear the Terrans had articulated. Drexxa saw this, and, with the bitter pragmatism that had once made her great, shifted tack. "We have indeed reached a moment of reckoning," she said. "Not solely because of these humans, but because of choices made over generations. I propose a compromise." She did not accept the human framework outright. Kheltari pride would not allow it, but she accepted its bones. Within days, negotiations began for what would become known as the Transparency Accords. The details were fought over in endless sessions. The Dominion would agree to host portions of its ledgers on shared servers accessible to accredited external auditors, including representatives from the Volari Conquered and other major powers. In return, those powers would submit their own high-level accounts to the same oversight, preventing anyone from using transparency as a one-sided weapon. Large interstellar transactions would be logged in an open, tamper-evident registry. No state would be able to secretly run a second set of books without risking exposure. Predatory debt practices, such as tying emergency relief to perpetual political concessions, would be codified as violations of the Interstellar Trade Codex, subject to joint sanctions. The Terran Ledger Corps refused the position of sole arbiter. "We are too young to be trusted with that," Rado said in one heated session. "We just proved we're capable of knocking over an empire's sandcastle." The last thing anyone should want is for us to be the only ones guarding the beach. Instead, a rotating council of auditors from multiple species was proposed, with humans occupying seats alongside Kheltari, Volari, and others. Behind all these arrangements, the quantum reconciliation engine hummed, verifying and cross-checking, ensuring that what was claimed matched what was recorded. The Orshuan syndicate screamed, quietly. Their business model, permanent opacity, could not coexist with this new order. Some of their leaders tried to pivot, rebranding themselves as legitimate logistics firms. Others retreated further into the margins, clinging to decaying routes. Not every former vassal of the Dominion welcomed the new era. Some preferred the predictability of a single master to the chaos of open competition. Others seized the opportunity with both hands, tearing up old agreements and renegotiating trade terms under the brighter light. In the midst of it all, humans went on doing what they did best, asking inconvenient questions, measuring twice before anyone cut, and occasionally, when no one else dared, pulling back the curtain on old illusions. Months after the drama on Vorakesh Prime, the ESS Resolute Margin floated in a quieter orbit around a different star. Its hull bore new markings, the sigil of the Transparency Accords, intersecting circles around a shared ledger icon. Inside, In a modest briefing room, Arun studied a fresh cascade of data. The patterns were different, but his mind recognized the echoes, hidden guarantees, temporary transfers that had become permanent, extraordinary projects devouring funds in ways their sponsors preferred not to discuss. Behind him, a screen showed a brief message from Nikhil. "New sector, old story," Nikhil said with a tired smile. "At least now, when we pull on threads, we're not doing it alone." Juno, older by experience, if not by years, sat across from Arun, going through introductory notes for a trainee of her own. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked Arun. He thought of Periapsis Spire, of the array of Thasuan, of Kheltari and Valari delegations, of the torsion gate's blinding flare arrested by a last-minute adjustment to budgetary priorities. "Tired?" he said. "Sometimes, but not enough to walk away. There's too much left to do, too many ledgers, still pretending to be honest." He closed the last file from the Dominion. Its once dominant glow on the galactic financial maps had softened, its peaks less pronounced. It was no longer an unquestioned overlord, but it still existed. Worlds within it were messy, louder now that they had more say over their own accounts. That was all right. Messiness, properly recorded, was life. Outside, the Resolute Margin's engines spooled up for another jump. Humanity, newest of the great accounting powers, was on its way to its next appointment with the truth.